Begin the current Daf Masech Yoma Daf Sabachei. Begin 7 lines down at the top of the Yomit. We continue the discussion of the previous Daf. We had a Machlikas Rav and Yechna. We had the Halach of the Mishnah, title of this parak Shnei Shiur. We have these two he-goats that have to be exactly the same. And we said that if something happens to one of them, so that, okay, then you have to go get a new peer to take the place of the one that something happened to that died. And then we said, V'hasheni Yira, Achi Yistayv. So it's Machlikas Rav and Yechna, which one is the second one? Because now you have whichever one, let's say Hashem died, and now you have two Lazazels. So the second one dies, which is the second one? From the first pair or the second pair. And that the Gemara continues bringing rayas regarding those halachas of those opinions, specifically asking on bringing a raya to Rabbi Yochanan from the halacha of our Mishnah. This some of this we can discuss today's daf is, as we said, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that he holds Balachayim Nidachim, that living creatures are rejected. Therefore, he holds that the one that's left to graze is the first one, and actually it's the second one of the second pair that's it's brought as the carbon. The Gemara continues explaining his opinion. Sa'ar HaMishtaleach, which we say is put out the pasture until it contracts a mum, because of the fact that we're not using it. The question is, the Gemara is going to discuss, is why can't it be used for next year's carbon? Why does it have to be left to develop a blemish? Use it next year. Hold on to it until next year. So the key terms we can discuss today's daf are machzah shekel, are that half a shekel that every single Jew has to give towards the karbanis of that year. Shumas halishka is 3 times a year they would go ahead and take away from that big chamber 3 boxes and put in and to use those funds to purchase the karbanis. But the rechema is the halacha that a house in the walled city, the person has up until 12 months to buy it back from the person he sold it to, and after that it's definitively confirmed as the buyer's house forever. Now, the Gemara continues regarding the discussion from the previous daf, that of Rabbi Yochanan. So it's not. We learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that Tammuz says that it's going to be left to die. Now, the assumption is that in the one that the Rabbanan said Yira, as we said that, let's say something happened to one of the karbanas. You have a Lashem and Azazel, and something happens to the Lashem. So you have to make up the Lashem. The problem is you can't just go bring a new animal from the street Lashem. You have to make a Hagral. It has to come through a lottery. So you take 2 identical animals, and you do a lottery. Now the problem is now you have 2 of the one that didn't die. So the Rabbanan say, okay, the second one's left to graze. Again, remember that as from last daf, it's Machlikas Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, which is the second one. But Al Kapanim, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the Tanakh. It says no Tammuz. It's not left to graze. It's left to die. So as Rashi explains what the Gemara's question is going to be, the assumption is the one that the Rabbanan say it's left to graze, and that would Rabbi Yehuda say no, it's left to die. Now we know from the previous daf that everyone agreed in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that Balachayim are nidachim. Because he said, Nishbach Adam, if the blood of the Lashem spilled out, so Yoma Daf, that the one that Lazaz has to die, but what do you mean? It's a living creature, it's a Bali Chai. Obviously, we said everyone agrees, even the opinion held that Bali Chai are not Nidachim, agreed, he said, I'm not going to Rabbi Yehuda, I'm going in the Rabbanon. Rabbi Yehuda, everyone agreed, Bali Chai Nidachim. Now, so the Gemara asked the following question. Bishlim of Rabbi Yochanan, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar that he says, it's a little bit of a cheshbon, again, the wording and whatever. The Amar that he says, Sheini Shebezug Rishon Yiro, you understand Rabbi Yochanan that he said that it's the second one, meaning the leftover one, the one that didn't die, of the first pair, that's Yira that's left to graze. That's what the Tanakhama was saying. So we could understand that Rabbi Yehuda Yomas, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that no, it's left to die because it's rejected. And as we say, Balachayim Nidachim, and Meskaper B'Sheni Shebezuk Sheni, so we understand that when you get atonement, it's going to be the second one of the second pair. It makes sense, the words of Rabbi Yehuda. But El Rav Dam, according to Rav, that he says that when the Tanakhama in the Mishnah said the other one, the second one's going to be left to graze. It means Sheni Shebezuk Sheni Yira. It's the second one from the second pair that's left to graze. And to the contrary, it's the first one that you had originally made that's ultimately brought as that carbon. And that is what we learned, that Rabbi Yehuda Yoma was according to Rabbi Yehuda, no, it's left to die. So Rabbi Yehuda, b'may mechaper. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, what are you going to get your atonement for? Because the first one, according to Rabbi Yehuda, cannot give an atonement. Because we know everyone agrees, even Rav agrees, that in Rabbi Yehuda that Balacham Nidachin, and you tell me that the second one is left to die, because that's the one that Rabbanan that you say is left to graze, according to Israel, left to die, and the first one you're not getting is Balacham Nidachin, so which one are you getting a kapar with? It's a shigel of a cheshbon, but the Gemara is asking that the Gemara's answer is going to be a little bit what we had already assumed from the previous daf, but on a simple translation of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda was disagreeing regarding what do you do with the second one. The second one it's misleading the word. It just means the other one that didn't die. But now, which one is that going to be? So we have Machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yehuda. Which one is that second one that's left to graze? Is it in the first pair or the second pair? Which obviously the other one is the one that you bring as the carbon, which would be so Lazazel or the Sol Hashem. Problem is that according to Rav, the one that's left to graze is from the second pair. Because Rav holds in the Tanakhama, the Balachim are not Nidachin, and it's from the first pair that's brought. So it sounds like from Rabbi Yehuda when he disagrees, no, not Yira, it's Tammuz. It sounds like he's going on the case of the Rabbanan. Whichever one the Rabbanan say Yira, he's saying Tammuz. Now, according to Rav, that's the second one. From the new pier that you did, the new Hagrala that you did, that other one is going to be left to die. So you're not using from the second pair. And the problem is, no, according to Yehudi, you can't use from the first pair either. Because he holds, and everyone agrees, even Rav agrees, that he holds Balacham Arni Dachin. So it's rejected. Or another, because he says that if Nishbach Adam, that Yoma Daf. So which one does he bring as the atonement? So it says the Gemara, Misabit, do you think Rabbi Yehuda, when he says that it's going to be left to die, Asheni Shabazug Shenikai, you think he's going in the same case, when I say case, meaning the same animal that the Tanakhama says, which according to Rav is the second one from the second pair, which they say is left to graze. On that one, you think he's saying that's when it's left to die? No. Rabbi Yehuda Asheni Shabazug Rishinkai. Rabbi Yehuda is going on the second one of the first pair, that's the one that's left to die, and you actually get the atonement with the second one. Whereas Rashi says, as we actually explained this, Teich de Bereno on the previous daf, that Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing on 2 points. Rabbi Yehuda is first of all disagreeing. He says, first of all, I want you to know, the halacha is not Yira. Halacha is Yomas. Which they have this machlekes regarding if Chatzas Tzibur is going to be able to die, or you always have to graze and blah, blah, blah. That's one machlekes. And the second machlekes, first of all, I have is that I hold it's the different, you have the wrong animal. You're saying it's the second one that grazes and the first one's brought. I say, no, the first one is the one that dies and the second one is brought because I hold Balachim Nidachin and you, at least according to Raz's interpretation, hold Balachim in Nidachin. So therefore it's not difficult on Rav. Now, they could do Kamaisim Hachida. Those who, this is also again Cheshbon, but it's from previous Daf. Now those who asked the question from the previous Daf, the first question we had asked. We had asked from the Mishnah, we had quoted on the previous daf that Rabbi Yehuda, we showed that, and moreover, Rabbi Yehuda says this halacha that if Nishbach Adam Yomis Mishtalech, which we had said that obviously Rabbi Yehuda holds Balachim Nidachin, because the Mishtalech, the Azazel, is a living creature. It wasn't slaughtered yet, and still we say it gets rejected. Now, we had previously used this to ask on Rav, because, what do you mean? Rav, you hold Balachim Nidachin. So he answered, as we said in the previous daf, oh, you're right, I wasn't going to Rabbi Yehuda, I was going to Rabbanan, yeah, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Balachim Nidachin. That's what we had asked in the previous daf. Now, those, however, who used the same exact source to ask on Rabbi Yehuda, and this is how they ask. It said in the Mishnah, more Rabbi Yehuda says, Nishbach Adam Yom Mishamishtaleyach, if the blood spills out, so then the one that's living that has to be sent away has to be left to die. If the one that was supposed to be sent away died, you have to spill out the blood. So now we're going to use that same source, not as a question on Rab, but on Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because Bishlim Rab, we understand according to Rab that he says that according to Tanakhama, that living creatures are not rejected. And which one is the one that's left to graze when we say the second one? We say the second one of the second pair, because it's the first, from the first pair that you actually bring as the Azazel, as Lashem, whichever one that's the one that didn't die. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, as we just said, is not going on that case that says it should be left to die, because he says va'id. What's va'id? You already said you disagree with the Tanakhama that it's not left to graze, it's left to die. Oh, obviously, meaning that, so obviously you're coming to tell us that it's the wrong one. Not only that you disagree it's left to die, But additionally, you're telling me in that case, which is implicit, that Balichaim on Nidachin. And that's why you're telling me that if Nishpech Adam, Yoma Mishtalech, to say that even though the Mishtalech is a living creature, has to be left to die. And that when you said in the ratio, the first machlek you said with the Tana Kama, that you said left to die, is not going on the one that the Rabbanan says left to graze, because they were saying that left to graze is the second one from the second period. And you're saying it's the second one from the first period. And that you're coming to disagree on two different points. Oh, so according to Rav, we understand. Reisha pligi bechatas tzibur. That in the first machlekes you're having with the Tana Kama, that the Rabbanan say it's left to graze, Yehuda saying it's left to die, that's their machlekes regarding achatas tzibur. Achatas tzibur, because we know, again, generally achatas, that you have shekipru ba'aleh ba'acher, you get a tumor with other one, so it's left to die. But that's their machlekes, what's Allah with achatas tzibur? Okay, that's machlekes number one. And the seifa pligi ba'alechayim. And then the next statement of Yehuda says v'oid, which is the seifa, that's another machlekes. Rabbanan saying that a living creature does not get rejected, and therefore they told me to get with the original one. And that Rabbi is coming to say that no, first of all, it's left to die, and second of all, no, it's meaning the first one is left to die, and the second one is sacrificed because Balchat are nidachin. That was what the two machlokes are. But Rabbi Yechanan, my beyoid, according to Rabbi Yechanan, what's the beyoid? Rabbanan also say that the first one is going to be rejected because Balachim they agree are nidachin. So what are you adding on when you're saying that Nishpech Adam, Yoma Mishtalech or Mesa Mishtalech Yishabech Adam? What's that coming to even tell us? Not telling us anything. Says the Gemara, Kasha. You're right. That's a difficulty, and we had said this in the previous Daf. We said that the Mishnah is meduik like Rav, who holds that Balachim are not nidachin. And the Brisa was meduik like Rabbi Yechanan, right? Because it's difficult. Our Mishnah, because according to Rabbi Yechanan that he holds that Balichaim on Nidachin, so then what's the machlekes that you're having between the Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda that you're saying void? There's no void. You're not adding on anything. The only thing that he would be adding on in this case would be the halacha of Balichaim Nidachin, which would infer that the Rabban hold that it's not Nidachin. But according to Rabbi Yechanan says it is Nidachin. It's definitely difficult how to read the Mishnah. That concludes the discussion of the previous Daf with this machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yechanan and how to explain that Hasheni Yira Hashei Stalin is it the second one of the first period or the second one of the second period, which ultimately is the machlekes of Balachem Nidachin or not, and that's the head machlekes is that according to Old Tanoim or is it a machlekes Tanoim itself the way Rav actually said. Okay, now the Gemara quotes again from our Mishnah. We said va'oid. Moreover, another thing Rabbi Yehuda was disagreeing with the Tana Kama. Rabbi Yehuda said Nishpech Adam. If the blood spills out, so then the animal, has to be left to die. And so too we said, if the mishtalech dies, so you have to spill out the blood. So the Gemara has the following question. Bishlam and Nishpech Adam, we understand regarding the case of if the blood spills out of the Sar Lashem. We know Yomis Mishtalech, that the one that has to be sent away has to be left to die. Why? Because you didn't yet do the mitzvah of the dam. Now, we know that according to everybody, when it says the word chukah in regards to avodas of Yom Kippurim, when it's done with big day love and it's written that you do with the white garments, which is what you do with the Sar Lashem, everyone agrees you spray the blood in the Kodesh HaGodashim, that's Shom Ma'akev. So everyone knows you have to bring more blood, another animal, another Sar Lashem, and it's not possible to do that without Hagrala. We know you can't get the Siyum without doing a lottery. Now, since Rabbi Yechanan holds that Balichaim are Nidachin, that living creatures are rejected, so we understand why the first Mishtalech has to be left to die. Because he didn't yet do the mitzvah of the blood of the Sar Lashem. But the second case, when the Mishtalech dies, why does Rabbi Yehuda say that the blood has to be spilled out? Why do you have to complete this? That you have to go ahead now, bring another 2 he-goats and to do a lottery and to spill out the blood, which you still have, of the first Sar Lashem? What do you mean? The mitzvah of Sar Mishtalech was already done. What does that mean? I wasn't done. I thought it died. So as Rashi explains, he says, what's ma'akiv by the Sar Lazazel is only the lottery. You just have to go ahead and make the lottery and put on one he-goat Sar Lashem, another one Sar Lazazel. Because we know according to Yehuda that he says, even if you didn't do the confession on the Sar Lazazel, it's going to be kosher. For sure, as Rashi explains, if you don't do the shiur, which is to send it off the cliff, for sure, according to everyone, there's not going to be ma'akiv. Because when it says chukah, are only things that the kohen does big deal of it. And not a thing that are done like the Sola Zazel is not even done by the Kohen. It's done by Ish Iti, a designated person who he's the one that they send him to send off the cliff. So that's not Ma'akiv. So why if the Mishtalech dies, they have to spill out the blood? The mitzvah's already done. Who cares if it dies? Why should that be Ma'akiv that you have to spill out the blood? So Amri Debeir Biyanim, they said in the Shibir Biyanim because Amakroy, it's Xeris Akasif. The pasuk says, "Yo'omed chai lefnei Hashem lechaper." The Sola Zazel should stand there living in front of Hashem for an atonement. The way that drasha is Ad Masa Yizakim Yizchai. Until how long does the Sola Zazel have to remain alive that it shouldn't die? Ad Shas Matan Damim Shel Chaveiroi. Until you have the gift of the blood of its counterpart of the Sola Hashem. And that's what the word lechaper is come to say, for the atonement of the blood of the Sola Hashem. But if it dies beforehand, then the atonement of the blood is insignificant, and therefore you need to go ahead and complete it, and you have to go ahead and now get a new Sola Zazel. And the problem is, like we said, without doing a lottery, it's not possible. So then you have to get two, and then therefore the first one ultimately is rejected. Because everyone agrees that when it's shchuta, when it's slaughtered, which is what this is, the Sola Hashem, because the blood is in the container, obviously slaughtered, that it's going to be rejected because it was not viable at the time when the Sola Zazel died until you get the new ones. Oh, it's already nitcha, so then you're not going to use the first one, rather it's going to use the second one. Now, the Gemara continues with a Mishnah that will be explained how it relates back to the halacha of our Mishnah. Nan Hasam, the Mishnah Masechta Shkal. Bnei Ir Sheshalchu, people of a city that sent through an agent, Eshekleim, their Machzah Shekel, which every single person has to give every single year, to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, what happened is that Benignaboy Sha'abdu, it was stolen or it was lost en route to the Beis HaMikdash. So it depends when this happened. In Nitrima Truma, if these 3 boxes, which are taken off 3 times a year, it was already separated before they found out that, that's way, at least the way Rashi explains it, Tais discusses, before it got lost, before they found out that it got lost, they had already taken off the shkalim in the Beis HaMikdash. So then the Jbayim, then the agents, they swear what's called the Shavuos HaShemim, because they were ultimately custodian in responsibility to watch this monies. They swear legizbarim to the treasurers of the Beis HaMikdash to say that they were negligent and whatnot, and because the loss is for hektish. Because in this situation, the people that donated the Machzah Shekels, that gave it, they wouldn't have to go ahead and do the shkalim again, as the Bryce is teaching Subas of Kaf Chesed Alf, that the truma takes effect on the lost ones that weren't known about yet. So since they already did the truma and they had already given, so although it wasn't yet received by the Gizbarim, but the fact that it wasn't known about that, they already have in mind whoever's on the way, and therefore that was included. So therefore now the loss is going to be the loss for hektish, so they would have to swear to hektish, say that we were negligent, and then they're going to exempt themselves. Now, but if not, meaning let's say the truma wasn't taken yet, it's on the way. It's before Rish Chodesh. They didn't take off the truma sadashki yet, so the loss is not to hektish; it's to the owner's loss because it never got there. So they're going to have to make up the Machzah Shekels. So then they have to swear to the people of the city that we didn't do anything that was negligence, and we're shemachinam, we're part of Gneva Veda. And in the Bnei Ir Shegel Tachten, and then the people of the city are going to have to take new shkalim to make it up, because although they sent it never got there to Yerushalayim. That's one half of the halacha, which is not the main point we want to bring out. It's the second half. Nimtzu, if it was found, which that's obviously going in the case of what was originally lost, or Ishtirzim are going to have more the thieves return it, which that's going in the case of, let's say, if it was stolen. So then, Elu shkalim. We said that what happens is it was lost or stolen. They said, okay, you guys got to make it up. You guys got to bring new Machzah Shekel. So they give a new Machzah Shekel, and then, it was found. He forgot it, he lost it in the hotel, where it is now on his way, and then we found all that zekel of gold, it was found. So what do you do now? You have a double shkalim, because they made up the murder shkalim. So it's actually machlekes. So the Tanakhama says, Eilu be'eilu shkalim, they're both shkalim, ve'ein oil lehem. And it doesn't count for the owners that had given the Machzah Shekels, Lashon Haba, it doesn't count for the next year. Next year you have to give again a Machzah Shekel. They're both the double quantity is all considered for this year's Machzah Shekel. He disagrees. Says no, it counts for the next year. You already guys got credit that you gave double Machzah Shekel. We'll count it for next year. So my time Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason Rabbi Yehuda? Because Amar Rabbi says, because Rabbi Yehuda holds Chayve Shel Shana Zu, the obligations of this year, meaning that was separated and designated for this year, could be brought for the following year too. And therefore, although you gave it for this year, we give you credit, you could bring it for next year's special Trumas Alishka. However, Abaya asked from the following brayso: Par B'sar Yomi Kippurim Shabu. What happens if the bull or the higot of Yomi Kippurim got lost? And so they now separated, they separated another animals to take their place. Or so to the Sir Avodah Sir Avodah Zarah is when the tzibur of Klal Yisrael, they sinned regarding Avodah Zarah because the courts had erroneously ruled that it's permitted, and it turns out it was really Avodah Zarah. So they have to bring a par as an oil, and they have to bring a Sarah Higot as a chatas. So let's say if they got lost, and then they went and they made a new carbon to take their place, and then they ultimately found the original ones. So the first opinion says, Kulan Yamusu. They're all left to die. Give Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is obviously l'shitasa, like he says in our Mishnah, where he says, although it's a chatas tzibur, but as he said in our Mishnah, unlike the Tanna Kamma, he says a chatas tzibur could be left to die. And just like a chatas of a yachid. Now, the main point of the question is, as Rashi explains, but ultimately, what is Rabbi Yehuda saying? He says, you don't bring it next year. Why is he saying it's left to die? I mean, I understand why he says, not like the next opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, I mean, they say, Yirat she'yistabu v'yimachur. They say, no, not left to die. Chatas tzibur, like we said, is different. It's great until it rubs a blemish, and then you sell it. And the Yiplu Demaim on the Dava then use its proceeds for the Dava when the Mizbeh is not being used. Shein Chatas Tzibur Meisik, because they say, no, Chatas Tzibur is not left to die. That's a machlekes we've known about in our Mishnah already. But one thing says, Abaya, why does Rabbi Yehuda say it's left to die? Why doesn't he say you bring it for next year? Because Rabbi, you said Rabbi Yehuda holds that you could use this year's funds for next year. So use this carbon for next year. Use the Siri Yom Kippurim for next year. Why are you going and saying that's left to die? That's Abayi's question on Rabbi. I mean, we know why he says Thomas if it has to die, but if it doesn't have to, then just leave it for next year. Why can't you use it? Hold on to it next year, Yom Kippurim. So on that, Amalei, he says to him, the Gemara attempts many different answers and rejects them. So Amalei, answer number one is a continuum in base. He says, Karban is Sibur? Meaning, those which come from the Trumas Alishka Ka'amrit, you want to say? No, he says, Shani Karban is Sibur. A carbon tzibur that's from Rosh Chodesh Nisan and onwards, which cannot be brought from the old funds, that's a different halacha. In other words, when Rava was explaining regarding the machzis hashekels, generally, yes, it's permitted to go ahead and give funds for next year. But when you have a carbon tzibur, meaning you bought the carbon already, oh, that's a different halacha. You can't hold on to it to next year. Why not? Because Reb Tavi Amar B'Yeshia. That the Amar Tavi, because he says, as his brother Mesas B'Shon of Zayin Ben Alach, Amar Tavi Amar B'Yeshia, he says, the Pasuk says in Mamidbar, Zois Oilas Chodesh B'Chodshay. This is the new Oila in its renewal. L'Chodshay Hashana. It says many different times in that pasuk the word Chodesh, new. To make a drasha to tell you that there is a Chodesh, a month, that you have to be machadish the karbanas, you have to make a renewal of the karbanas, and bring them specifically from the new truma. As we learn now, when is that? We learn that Shana from Nisan. It says Rishon L'Chem L'Chodshay Hashana. It says by Chodesh Nisan it's the Chodshay Hashana. So that's the month of renewal. Which Amr Torah, the Torah is telling you Chadesh V'Havli Carbon Mitzuma Chadash. You have to renew and bring the carbon specifically from the new truma. So therefore, you're right. Maybe Rav is correct. Maybe if you don't hold that generally you could bring 1 year's funds for another. You can't take a carbon from last year's funds, which you separated the Syrian Kippur that was lost. You can't bring that carbon next year because that carbon is from last year's funds. We could have a layover of your funds, but the carbon itself cannot be from last year's funds, which you already bought from last year's funds. And therefore, that's why it's not a difficulty on Rabbi, why the Syrian Kippur and all those carbonas tzibur, that you cannot use it for next year and hold on to it because it has to be from the new funds. The Gemara says, wait a second, that doesn't answer the whole question. Because Hatei Nefsar, that's very well regarding the Sar, the Higod, which is brought from the Trumas Alishka. But Par Ma'ikilema, how's that going to answer regarding the Par of the Kohen Gadol? That comes from his own private funds. That's not from the public funds. Why are you telling me that the Karbanis, that they got lost, the Sar and the Par of Yom Kippurim? That you have to let them die For why? Or it's machlokes, or they graze, but the point is, why would you just say you leave it for next year? You tell me you can leave over the funds. So the story, I understand why not, because of carbon tzibur. And now we have the pasuk of Zayis Eilis Chadish B'Chad Shel Chad Shel has to be only for the new fund. But the power is a private carbon from the Kohen Gadol. Why can't he leave it over the next year? So, says the Gemara, Gzeir Par Atusar. Okay, you're right, good question, but since the Higo is problematic, because it wouldn't be from the new funds, so the par, similar, this is for him, this is for Klal Yisrael, it might get confused, both of them, the bloods are brought into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So because the star is problematic, so then we said the par also has to be left to die. It says Gemara, Shum Gezeri Musu. Well, because of a Gzeira, of a concern we leave it to die. Seems like the Gemara holds that that's not reasonable to assume that we would leave it to die because of a Gzeira. Moreover, how did this whole halacha itself? That you tell me why it has to be left to die. And by the power, it's only because of the sar. And the sar, why is it left to die, is because Reb Tavi's halacha has to be from the new shkalim. That itself is mitzvahi. It's only initially the appropriate way to do it as a mitzvah. It's not ma'akiv. So if it's not ma'akiv, you're going to tell me that because of that you can leave it to die when it's not even ma'akiv at all. It says, the karbanas of the public that come on the first day of Nisan, the mitzvah is to bring it from the new shkalim. To bring it from the old funds, you're going to fulfill your obligation. It's just missing a mitzvah. So if it's so, then why would you say that the higo is going to be left to die if it's not in ma'akiv at all? So you're right, the Gemara rejects that answer. See, El Reb Zera, he gives a second answer. He says, a different reason. The lottery, which is what makes it into the sar, Lashem or Lashem, cannot work from one year to the next. So the Gemara says, okay, but b'naisiv v'nagro. So bring it next year, make another gyro. Says the Gemara, Gizera, that's a rabbinic concern. Maybe they're going to say hagirl kaveim mishon lachaverta. No, we don't want to do that because people might not realize. They might say, oh, that last year's girl worked for this year. So although we even made a new girl, but people are going to get confused. But the Gemara rejects it the same way anyway. It says haten asar. This would only be a good answer for the higo, for the sar lashem. But par Michael and him, what are you going to do with the bull? When there's no lottery on the bull at all. So why would that be a problem? So the Gemara says, yeah, gzer par to sar. No, since sar is a problem, because that people might think we used last year's lottery, so therefore par also because of sar. But says the Gemara, gzer yamusu. Well, because of a concern, we're going to leave it to die. And the way Rashi explains the question, what do you mean, why not die? What else are we going to do with it? No, sufficiently just let it graze. To die because of this holding, which in itself is only Gzeira. So rather the Gemara comes up with answer number 3. Amar Rabban Kamei Dabaya. They said it's a Gzeira Mishum Chatas Shenesu Ba'aleha. We're concerned that maybe the owner of the carbon will die during the year. So we're talking about the power. The sar we had answers, but we said, okay, why is he going to die and why the power of the sar? But the power, for example, let's say the kohen might die this year. Which Rashi's wording, he says hakoyin, sounds like the kohen gadol, but Tosfos says it would really be any kohen because they're all bailam on their par. But be that as it may, we're concerned that the bailam might die, and if the bailam die, then it's not going to be valid anymore. So the Gemara says, okay, haten et par, but that's only good for now going the other way around. Up until now, we had an answer for the sar. We said, what do you do with the par? Now I say, okay, haten et par, that makes sense for the bull, but the sar which are carbon tzibur, we know ain't tzibur mesa. Michael, what are you going to say for the sar? What's the concern over there? So the Gemara says, yeah, gzer sar out par. Since the par, we have a problem that if the owner is going to die, really, as Tai says, if any coin is going to die, then it's going to be invalid. So therefore, we're saying you can't hold on to it to the next year. So the sar, we make gzer. If we let you use the par, that you might come to use the sar. It says the Gemara, gzer yamusu, because we're going to let it to die. Again, like Rashi had previously said, let it at least graze. But as because of a gzeira. But why because of a gzeira would you make it die? So rather says the Gemara, answer number 4 is gzeira mishum chatas she'aber shunasa. It's a gzeira because, not because of shenesu ba'aleha, because a concern that it might be a chatas that already passed its year. A chatas has to be bashnasa. Now maybe until next Yom Kippurim, it already will have passed a year from this sar from when it was born. Now the halacha is, we know that all siri chatas are possible after a year. Because the Brisa teaches in Teres Kohanim, it says by the chatas of a yachid, of an individual, Torah achas yilachem, which they're comparing all of the Torah to the context over there of Avodah Zarah. Just like a Chatas of Avodah Zarah is in its first year, also over here it has to be in the first year. Because as the Teres Kohanim says, when it says Yiyah, it includes Sira Hiragolim. When it says Lachem, it includes Sira Avodah Zarah. La'isa, it comes to include Sarah Nasi. So all the Sirim have the halacha that it has to be in its first year. So the reason why we invalidate it for next year is because it might be already past the year. So because of that, we say you can't hold on to the next year. So the Gemara wonders, Gezerah? Says, you tell me it's a Gezerah? What are you talking about? It's not a Gezerah. For sure, it's already past the year by the time you get to next year. So what do you think it's a Gezerah up to next year? So when it says Hale Kasha, it's actually not a difficulty. We actually could find a case that by next year, then we will not be Abish Nasa. Why? Because we're going like Rabbi that he says that it's not a complete year, as we'll define in a moment what is a year, depending on the context, from one Yom Kippur to another Yom Kippur, because we count according to a lunar year, we go according to the moon. Now, a solar year has 11 days more than a lunar year. And you have to give, for the whole year, what that extends the sun more than the moon. The time like learn the Brisa. Pasuk says in Vayikra, says that if a person's not going to redeem until it comes out a Shana Tamima, a full year, so then the house that he sold in the walled city is going to belong to the buyer, and it's not going to go out in Yale anymore. Now, what does this mean, Shana Tamima, a full year? So it's a machlekes. The first opinion, that of Rebbe, who was saying that our answer is going like, he says, Maina sholish meis v'shisha mechamisha yoim kiminim mesachama. He said you count 365 days like the days of a solar year. So that's what the halacha of Pati Archaima, which is confirmed to be by Lekeach, is whether the Bezdin made it into a leap year, there's Adar Sheni, whether there's no Adar Sheni, and there's only one Adar, we go based on a solar year, that's Divrei Rabbi. Now, when they disagree, they say, no, everything goes the way the Jewish people count. You count 12 months from day to day, if it's a regular year, as a continuum of some of Aleph, Vim Nesabra, and however, if it's what's called the Ibiyar, if they add an extra month, then the Sabra Meicher, then it gets extended for the seller, and it will not be confirmed until you reach that exact same day and month that it was sold in. That's the machlekes. Are you going to go 365 days, or is it going to be 12 months? Now, therefore, according to Rabbi, we can answer our question. We could talk about where the animal was sanctified on day 8 of when it was born, because, again, an animal can't be a korban if it's under 8 days old. So on Erev Yom Kippurim, in a regular year, they went and they sanctified this korban to be the Seirim. So when it reaches the next Yom Kippurim, you have not yet had 365 days, you actually have only 364 days. Because like we said, there's 11-day discrepancy between the lunar year and the solar year. And if you have the 8 days, so you have yourself a few days to differentiate between the solar year and the lunar year, and therefore it's possible to have actually Toich Shnasa. You could have hold on to the Sar to the next year. But like we had said, it's a Gzeira, but Toich Shnasa, Atula Achar Shnasa. So even though Rabbi Yehuda actually validates obligation from this year to next year, and therefore Rava, who from Aman Aleph stands correct that maybe it's true that the funds of this year could be used for next year. We said, if that's the case, then why doesn't he say that you could use the Seiri from this year for the next year? It's a Gzeira of a Chatas She'avar Shnasa. And we said, why is that a Gzeira? It is Avar Shnasa. It says, no, it's Gzeira. Why is it Gzeira? Because you technically could have, in the context of the laws of the Chatas, to be within its year, and yet, for the halacha of the year, it's not, because like Rabbi says by Batei Rechaima, that the year goes based on a solar year, so even though technically it's already past the year, because you Makdish before Yom Kippur last year, now it's already next year Yom Kippurim, so obviously past the year. No, in those halachas, a year is defined on the solar, and therefore it's still within the year. So it's only gzeira of teich shnasa atu la'achar shnasa, and that's why Rebbe held. That's why this halacha was said by Rabbi Yehuda that you had to go ahead and let it die because of a gzeira of next year, and which does not contradict the halacha that but Rabbi Yehuda holds, but you could use from 1 year to the next year. But here's a separate halacha of a gzeira that it might be a chatash of shnasa. Thank you to any time. Those things.